And at number 10, Vormir. Leading up to the film, there was a whole lot of speculation about where the Soul Stone, the last of the Infinity Stones, was hiding. From Wakanda to Titan, there was no shortage of theories. Turns out, none of them were right. The Soul Stone was actually located on Vormir, the sixth planet in the Helgentar system that in the comics is part of the Kree Empire. And creatures called Vorms, lizard worms, live there. They've made a few appearances in the comics interacting with the likes of Thor. Now they don't appear in the film when Thanos pays the planet a visit, but someone else does, Red Skull. After his death in 1945, he was transported there, or rather his spirit was, to become the guardian of the Soul Stone. What an unexpected surprise. And at number 9, Stan Lee. Of course Stan Lee makes a cameo in the film. It's expected. This time around, Stan appears as a school bus driver, driving the bus that Peter Parker and his classmates are on, during a scene which some of you may remember from the trailer where an alien ship appears in the air. When everyone sees the ship, everyone on the bus freaks out, except Stan Lee, who merely states, "What's the matter with you? You've never seen a spaceship before?" Oh, Stan Lee. And at number 8, Arrested Development. The Russo's brothers' initial claim to fame wasn't the MCU films. Rather, it was Arrested Development. The duo had directed multiple episodes of the cult hit, and they even slipped in a little Easter egg referencing the show in Captain America's Civil War, the staircase car that Cap runs on in the airport battle. This time around, they've snuck another one in. But this one is much harder to spot. In a glass case of the Collectors, a character whose collections have already given us a few great Easter eggs in the past, you can spot a certain figure. You may notice that there's a blue figurine wearing cutoff shorts in the glass case. This is a reference to Arrested Development character Tobias, and when he attempted to join the Blue Man Group. And at number 7, Defender. Throughout the film, you may notice that teenage Groot is carrying around a handheld video game. Aside from being the cutest thing ever, turns out that the game he's playing has an interesting and fitting story. The game is Defender, a 1981 horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up arcade game that was later ported to the Atari 2600 and other consoles. Turns out Defender has a very similar storyline to that of Infinity War. You must destroy alien invaders and protect astronauts from being hurt and abducted. How relevant. And at number 6, we have a Hulk. Towards the beginning of the film, as the Asgardian refugee ship makes its way to a new settlement on Earth, Thanos shows up. Loki makes a stand against the Mad Titan, and before everything goes to hell, he utters a line that you'll all remember from the Avengers that came from Tony Stark. We have a Hulk.
I have an army. We have a Hulk.
Up next, number 5, we've got Reality Stone Throwback. Being adapted from a massive comic franchise, it makes perfect sense that certain sequences, actions, or behaviors of characters depicted in the panels would make their way onto the big screen. Such is the case when Thanos exhibits his power with the Reality Stone. Taking place in a scene on Nowhere, Thanos pulls a little trick with Drax and Mantis to subdue them. He turns Drax's body into blocks, and Mantis's into ribbons. This is a tactic that he uses in the comics, but with 2 other characters, Eros and Nebula. Regardless, it still shows Thanos' power and what he's capable of with the Reality Stone, and it definitely ain't pretty. Up next, number 4, Alien reference. Who doesn't love a good horrific alien reference? When Spider-Man and Iron Man attempt to free Doctor Strange from Ebony Maw's control in the film, there's a moment where Peter pulls inspiration from the Alien franchise and sucks Ebony Maw out of a breach in the ship's hull, tossing him into outer space and to his death. Peter also makes another reference later on in a bit of dialogue when he mentions that if any aliens appear and try to lay eggs in his chest, he won't be having any of that. Up next at 3, Thanos and Spider-Man. Speaking of Peter Parker, in another panel-to-frame adaptation, Spider-Man takes a shot at Thanos in the film as he does in the comics, and what we see on the screen is almost identical to what happened in the panels. During the Titan sequence in the film, Peter flings his web into Thanos' eye like he does in the comics. Thanos also tosses the web slinger down onto the ground in a very similar way to what his illustrated self did. And at number 2, the snap. One of the most devastating moments in the comics is when Thanos has assembled all the Infinity Gems into the Infinity Gauntlet, and snaps his fingers. By snapping, he eliminates half of humanity, causing people to fade away and disappear. It's a tremendous and horrific show of power, and the moment makes it into Infinity War as one of the final moments of the film, having dire consequences just as it does in the comics. But fear not, friends, those of you familiar with the story arc may know what happens to reverse those events. While we don't get that saving grace moment in the film, our next number hints that not all hope is lost. And last but not least, in our number 1 spot, the post-credit sequence. If all of that wasn't enough for you, the post-credit sequence is a bit of a whopper. While everyone is fading away, Nick Fury, aka Samuel L. Jackson, makes his last moments count. He busts out a beeper-looking device and sends a distress call. For starters, in classic Samuel L. Jackson snakes on a plane behavior, he shouts out an incomplete word that rhymes with motherbucker. So who is he calling? Well, the screen on his device flashes a logo of a certain hero that we had high hopes of having a cameo in Infinity War, none other than Captain Marvel. It's safe to say that the Avengers 4 film will definitely include Brie Larson's upcoming character.
In at number 10, Guardians of the Galaxy. When the trailer begins, we see Tony alone in a spaceship floating through space and recording a final message message for Pepper Potts because, as he says in the trailer, he's almost out of oxygen. Now at first I couldn't tell what the helmet was that he was recording on, but I soon realized that it was simply just whatever was left of the Iron Man suit. The more interesting thing here though is the overhead shot that we get of the spaceship that he's in. It's none other than the Guardians of the Galaxy ship, which is a nice little Easter egg that Tony managed to escape. Also, we're hoping at some point maybe Captain Marvel will swoop in to save him. Number 9. Farmer Thanos. As if Thanos alone isn't scary enough, it appears he's hung up his armor to clear the fields of any crows that remain. This Easter egg is a reference to the comic books where in Jim Starlin's original Infinity Gauntlet miniseries, Thanos is peacefully living as a farmer. In the comic books, he ultimately fails his mission to wipe out half of all life, but here we see him enjoying the fruits of his labor. We even have a shot of him checking out his crops as he's walking through the fields. Number 8. Where is Shuri? When Natasha is meeting with Bruce Banner and Steve Rogers back at the Avengers headquarters, we see Banner staring at the screens of the people that are missing. We see Scott Lang, and beside that we see a quick snap of Shuri. This is a sad one for fans because it most likely confirms that Shuri was snapped away. We don't want to believe it because an off-screen death for that character would just be really confusing, but the Russo brothers did confirm that she was killed along with Jane Foster, Krog, Mike, and Ned. But let's hope they were misquoted because we really want to see her taking over the mantle of Black Panther, and an off-screen death would have just been like terrible. Number 7. Nebula on Titan. Nebula appears stranded on Titan and is presumably in the wreckage of her ship that Thanos destroyed when he battled against Stark, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Nebula herself, and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, what we don't know is whether or not she crossed paths with Tony again after the snapping. It's possible that they could have found each other and then just went separate ways, or it's also possible that they both assumed the other was dead. In at number 6, The Collector. At first glance of seeing Nebula in the spacecraft, many would assume that it is in fact Tony that she's placing her hand on. However, in the first shot of Tony, he's wearing a tank top exposing his shoulder, but when Nebula places her hand on someone, their shoulders are covered. The person she's putting her hand on their shoulder, they also appear to be strapped into the seat, and the rumored Easter egg for this is that the person she's greeting is the Collector. The last time we saw the Collector was when Thanos was interrogating him about the Reality Stone. Could he have escaped somehow while the Guardians of the Galaxy were dealing with Thanos? I guess we'll have to find out. Number 5. Hawkeye becomes Ronin. Perhaps one of the most anticipated heroes that we can't wait to see is the reveal that Hawkeye has become Ronin. The name Ronin refers to the Japanese term for a masterless samurai or lone warrior, and in the comic books, Clint Barton is the second person to take on the Ronin identity when he rejoins the new Avengers in the aftermath of Civil War. So seeing Natasha finding Clint killing a Yakuza in Japan is a giant Easter egg that means we will at least get to see Ronin and possibly a new team of Avengers to take down Thanos. Number 4. Old armor. Captain America has had many different wardrobe changes throughout his roles in the MCU, but it appears as though he will be donning his armor from the Winter Soldier film. Although it's a bit darker in the shot when we see him standing next to Natasha, you can see the similarities. Number 3. EndGame. If you recall, when the Avengers are stranded on Titan, Doctor Strange tells Tony that they're in the EndGame now. Little did we know that he was hinting at the name of the next film, which was confirmed in the trailer's release. Number 2. The Power Stone. This may be a far-fetched idea, but did you notice how the logo coloring for EndGame was in purple? Many believe it's purple because, well, Thanos is purple. However, we think that that's a little too simple of a conclusion to make. Do you know what else is purple? The Power Stone. We believe that the purple text is referring to the importance that the Power Stone will play and has already played in the MCU. Even in the Guardians of the Galaxy, when the Collector is referring to the Power Stone, he says these carriers can use the stone to mow down an entire civilization like wheat in a field. Could this be foreshadowing for mowing down Thanos, who, funny enough, is a farmer now? Lastly, at our number 1 spot, time travel. At the very end, the team is confused by seeing Ant-Man at the front gates of the Avengers headquarters, and at first they believe that it's a previous recording. However, Natasha says no, he's actually at the front door. This means that Scott Lang managed to escape from the quantum realm, and behind him is the van that has the machine to access it. That points to the plot of this next film, including the possibility of time travel and access to other dimensions. With Scott's help and a new team of Avengers forming, we can't wait to see what goes down. Avengers Endgame will be in theaters April 26, 2019, and we're as excited as you are.
And at number 10, it's them. There's one point in the film where Bill Foster spots a bunch of ants crawling through the lab. In response, he lets out a line, It's Them. This is actually a reference to the film Them. Them is a classic science fiction monster movie from 1954. A black and white picture, the film was one of the first nuclear monster movies, and the very first big bug feature. It tells the story of a nest of gigantic irradiated ants found in the New Mexico desert that quickly becomes a national threat when they break loose. It's got some pretty iconic shots that you may recognize even if you're not totally familiar with the sci-fi side of classical Hollywood cinema. Anywho, it's an apt reference, all things considered. Plus, Scott, Hope, and Cassie are all watching them at the end of the film too. And at number 9, Animal House. When Scott is kidnapped, you may have noticed that he's watching something. It's Animal House, the 1978 film starring Jim Belushi. The scene he's watching in particular has a cheeky connection to the content of Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's a scene with Pintlow, played by Tom Hulce, and Dave Jennings, played by Donald Sutherland, where the two are stoned and carry on a conversation about how there are galaxies within atoms. Even in his downtime, Scott just can't get away from the quantum realm, can he? And at number 8, Stan Lee. Of course there's a Stan Lee cameo. Stan Lee has made a cameo in every single MCU film, and Ant-Man and the Wasp is no exception. This time around, Stan can be spotted during the car chase sequence. Stan is an elderly motorist whose car is shrunken down by one of the shrinking discs. Stan then says, "The 60s were great, but now I'm paying for it." And at 7, Jeffrey Ballard. This Easter egg is a reference to a character that appears in the comics, and is actually an enemy of Bill Foster's Black Goliath. Jeffrey Ballard in the film is an FBI agent that's contacted by Birch and given that tip to catch Hank and Hope. In the comics though, he's a supervillain named Centurion, who is initially a government official who was sent to Star International as a security official in his first appearance in Black Goliath Volume 1, Issue 4, back in 1976. He would later go on to be a Miss Marvel villain. Perhaps we'll see more of Ballard in the future? And at 6, Tim, without Eric. Fans of the comedy duo Tim and Eric may have gotten a lovely surprise during the scene in the San Francisco harbor when Ant-Man goes giant in front of that boat he's chasing. On the boat is a familiar face, Tim Heidecker. Tim from Tim and Eric fame has a little cameo as the whaleboat captain, and lets out a little scream when he sees Scott in all of his massive glory. Kevin Feige is apparently a huge Tim and Eric fan. Also fun fact, Tim also appeared in another Marvel movie, although it wasn't part of the MCU. Rather, it was the 20th Century Fox 2015 Fantastic Four movie. Up next at 5, Egghead. When we find out about Ghost's origins, one of the reveals is that her father was a scientist known as Dr. Elias Starr. He experimented with quantum technology, which is what turned Ghost into what she is. Turns out that Dr. Starr isn't just a new name. He has a history in the comics as being a villain named Egghead. Egghead is one of the sillier Marvel villains out there. He was an atomic scientist with an egg-shaped head who first appeared in Tales to Astonish issue 38 in 1962. And at number 4, The Big Lebowski. At the start of the film, Scott is walking around in a bathrobe. This isn't just because he's a chill dude. Rather, it's a reference to another well-known and adored dude, the dude himself from The Big Lebowski. According to director Peyton Reed, there's a handful of films that influenced the way that he approached Ant-Man and the Wasp, including After Hours, Midnight Run, and even The Empire Strikes Back. But turns out The Big Lebowski was also a big influence, to the point where it inspired Scott's wardrobe. Reed told Cinema Blend in an interview, I quote, "When we talk about the Elmore Leonard and the sort of noir and crime influences, there's a hint of Big Lebowski in there. There's a reason why Paul Rudd is in a bathrobe for the beginning, when he first comes in and sees Pym's laboratory. It's the idea that you can't really have a passive hero in the way Lebowski is in that movie in a Marvel movie, but we wanted to flirt with it with Scott." And at number 3, Giant Man. Based on all of the trailers, we already knew that we'd be seeing more of Scott Lang enlarging himself in Ant-Man and the Wasp. That was a trick he first tried out in Captain America Civil War, so naturally it's no surprise that he'd use it again in his sequel film. When Scott grows to his big boy size to chase after that boat in San Francisco Harbor, you can spot a newscast on a TV screen that calls him Giant Man. This is a reference to Giant Man, the alias that belonged to a handful of heroes in the comics, including Hank Pym and Bill Foster. Foster, who initially went by the name Black Goliath, took the Giant Man mantle from Pym, who himself has gone through a series of other aliases in the past aside from Ant-Man. Scott Lang has also taken up the alias of Giant Man, but in the Ultimate Marvel universe, as part of a team called Giant Men, who were part of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s reserves, and also featured his daughter Cassie Lang as a member. In our number 2 spot, Baba Yaga. During one point in the film, Kurt, Scott's buddy, mentions the name Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga in real life is part of Slavic folklore, a supernatural being who appears deformed and dwells deep in the forest in a hut typically described as standing on chicken legs. Turns out Baba Yaga actually has some significant ties to the Marvel universe too. She first appeared as a character in Captain Britain Volume 2, Issue 11, back in 1985, and is of Russian origin, being the goddess of earth, witchcraft, and misfortune. She would pop up a few times, but in her first appearance, she fought Captain Britain and his shape-shifting girlfriend Megan when they accidentally stumbled upon her home. Also, fun fact, in the comics, Captain Britain is the character who first introduced the concept of the multiverse in the Marvel universe. Speaking of multiverses, in at number 1, the Quantum Realm. In the first Ant-Man film, there was an Easter egg inserted in the Quantum Realm when Scott entered it. It was a blink and you'll miss it moment. Janet Van Dyne's Wasp. Now, according to director Peyton Reed and Marvel Studios President Kevin Feige, another Quantum Realm Easter egg was inserted in the film. Apparently, it's something that you'll only catch when you go frame by frame, and many think that we won't be able to really see it until the film is released digitally and in HD. But some keen people think they've spotted what Feige and Reed have been talking about: Thanos' face, smiling. Apparently, it's visible in the wide shot of Scott floating in the post-credit scene, with the top left of his head and his eyes briefly flashing to reveal his face. Now, others believe that the purple eyes that appear aren't Thanos', they're Dormammu's. This would fit better with what Reed had said. I quote, "Like the first movie, there are clues in the quantum realm to other possibilities and things. We've definitely laid some groundwork for some stuff down there, similar to what we did in the first movie. So, what do you guys see? Is that Thanos or Dormammu? Or something else entirely? And if it is Dormammu, how would that play into the future of things?"
Number 10. Russo cameo. It is not uncommon for directors to appear in their movies, and the Russos are no exceptions. You can see a brother at one of the support meetings run by Steve, for survivors of the snap who are attempting to move on with their lives. The director in this case, Joe, details his attempts to go on a date and how both him and his companion began crying, but they decided that they would see each other again. This movie brings the feels. If you felt the last one was lacking in any character moments, this one brings them in spades. Better than an M. Night cameo, I think. Number 9. X-Men names. Since Disney has acquired far more rights and assets than they had when they started the MCU, it is now more likely than ever that properties such as the X-Men and the Fantastic Four could appear in this universe. And some subtle priming occurred in this movie in the memorial scene. When Scott Lang returns from the quantum realm, he stumbles across the mass memorials for those lost in the snap. As he scrambles around looking for his family's names, there are X-Men names to be found. One in particular, Robert DaCosta, aka Sunspot of the New Mutants. Sunspot can absorb and channel solar energy. It's going to be very interesting to see how mutants could be incorporated into this universe and who they will choose. I mean, they have lots of choices. If they go with an atypical roster, they can even avoid those pesky Fox comparisons. Number 8. Captain Marvel's haircut. Carol Danvers may start the film with a similar look to that of her own film, though it is slightly different, a bit more made up, which caused a lot of contention online. However, after a certain time jump, she appears with a haircut reminiscent of the style she sports in Higher, Further, Faster. The arc by Kelly Sue DeConnick that transformed the character into Captain Marvel gave her a new suit and look, and also contained a bit of the arc upon which her film was based. DeConnick also got a bit of a cameo in that movie. Number 7. The Terminal Beach by J.G. Ballard. This is a book that can be seen being read in the film. J.G. Ballard was a famous novelist and short story writer, known for his post-apocalyptic concepts. This book, The Terminal Beach, is a collection of short stories, one of which is called EndGame. It's the tale of a prisoner who lives in a house with his executioner, but has no idea when he will be executed. So to pass the time, the two play chess. Endgame, of course, also refers to the denouement or final bout of moves in a chess match. This can occur where sometimes the conclusion of the match is foregone, but the player may have no way to avoid it, and have to play it to the end. Significant. Number 6. Ballet shoes. Black Widow can be seen in the Avengers compound office after a particularly difficult conference call, and on a chair in the room lie some ballet shoes. Perhaps innocent, perhaps a reference to the Red Room, the area where Black Widow was created, raised, and honed to be an assassin, or potentially some setup for her solo movie. In films, nothing is placed there by accident, especially not so prominently in the foreground. Number 5. The Big Lebowski. After the events of Infinity War, Thor isn't doing so well. The deaths of his family and everyone he knows are really starting to weigh on him, and he has descended into a life of wastrelessness and video games. He has grown out long hair and a beard, drinks beer, wears a long robe, and loose shirt. In a sense, he has become the dude, and Tony even refers to him as Lebowski. The Big Lebowski is a 1998 cult film starring Jeff Bridges. It tackles slacker culture. In this film, Jeff Bridges plays a character named the Dude, who ends up on a series of random adventures because of his hapless nature. In fact, a large part of the plot is driven forward by a rug. They gotta find the rug, it's a great movie. Number 4. America's Ass. Okay, seriously, get out, spoilers. During the time heist, a crew of Iron Man, the Hulk, Captain America, and Ant-Man go back to 2012, to the incident in New York, to get the stones. While there, Tony comments on the costume that Cap had during that era, and says it does nothing for Cap's ass. Ant-Man reiterates that it's America's ass, a sentiment that Captain America parrots after a duel with himself leads to him knocking himself out. He confirms that it is indeed America's ass. This is a reference to all of the memes and lusts surrounding Cap's rear during 2012 after the Avengers film was released. There were gifs for days. It started pretty specifically after the gym scene. You know the one, Cap punching the punching bag? There are a lot of thirsty people out there, and they're still thirsty. There were whole fan pages dedicated to this, just blogs about Captain America's fantastic rear. I mean, you know, it is amazing. I like it. It's not Nightwing, but still. Number 3. Harley. So okay, well, get your tissues ready. But if you imagine that this film is going to be the end of the road for some of our heroes, then you were 100% right. And during one of the heroes' send-offs, the characters are there. All of them, just a huge massive scene. This includes Harley, who is part of Iron Man 3, the child that helps Tony repair his armor and also manages to help him overcome his PTSD, thanks to the magic of being a child in a movie. A full-grown Harley attends the funeral, and even gets his own full pan. Nick Fury was also there, and Jon Favreau reprised his role as Happy. Never forget Jon Favreau starred it all. People tend to forget that he directed Iron Man. Number 2. New Asgard. In the film, the remaining Asgardians have settled in a little coastside town called New Asgard. The thing is, that spot is exactly where Odin said that people would settle in Thor Ragnarok, right before Loki and Thor battle Hela for the first time. Odin, wise and all-seeing till the end, but still a terrible parent. Actually, this movie was all about tying up loose ends. Also, that whole fisherman town thing was very Aquaman. I was just waiting for him to show up. Crossover time. Number 1. Hail Hydra. So I make this joke all the time, and so does the internet. Hydra Cap, the arc that produced the infamous panel of Captain America saying, "Hail Hydra." Ultimately, this arc was undone very quickly, as it proved to not only be extremely memeable, but also highly unpopular, to have such an icon essentially be turned into one of the very villains he fought against. Well, in keeping with this film showing that it is indeed aware of the culture surrounding these films, they had a little fun with this. In order to get one of the Infinity Stones, Captain America must go undercover in S.H.I.E.L.D. as a Hydra agent in order to get the asset he seeks. He leans in and says the infamous, "Hail Hydra." Amazing, so perfect, and way better than how the line was originally implemented.
And at number 10, vintage Ant-Man helmet. In the film, Captain America, aka Steve Rogers, and Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, travel back to the 70s after their first attempt at obtaining the Tesseract failed. Going back to get more Pym particles along with the stone, Steve has to find a way of distracting a younger Hank Pym, a brilliantly de-aged Michael Douglas, who then runs out of his lab so Steve can slink in to grab the particles. When we first see Pym, the camera pans across his lab, and you can spot a vintage Ant-Man helmet sitting on a counter. This is the helmet that Ant-Man initially wore in the comics when he first debuted, and perhaps in the world of the MCU, this was a prototype that Hank was working on. Up next, number 9, Fortnite. After Fortnite and Marvel's successful crossover in the Battle Royale game back when Avengers Infinity War came out, it should be no surprise that Marvel and Fortnite would collaborate again. While the news of a new in-game crossover event broke a few days prior to the film's release, it may have been a surprise for fans of the game to see the game actually being played in the MCU by Thor and his pals Korg and Meek. When Hulk and Rocket go to see Thor at New Asgard, Thor is chugging back beers and playing online. Or at least Korg is, and then even threatens an annoying kid over their headset. Up next, number 8, Budapest. Black Widow and Hawkeye have had a hell of a long ride together working for S.H.I.E.L.D. Long before the Avengers Initiative began, these two were out working field missions together, and they forged a really close bond. As they head out to retrieve the Soul Stone on Vormir, they're flying through space, and Hawkeye makes a comment about Budapest, noting how much more wild this mission is in comparison. This is a reference to 2 lines that Hawkeye and Black Widow have in the first Avengers film. In that movie, Natasha says that the Battle of New York reminds her of Budapest, and Clint responds with, "You and I remember Budapest very differently." While we still don't know exactly what went down in Budapest, it was clearly a memorable mission for these two. And at number 7, faint clanging. While there aren't any post-credit scenes in EndGame minus a mid-credit montage of all the MCU characters who appeared in the films, there is one little surprise at the very end of the credits, when the Marvel title card appears. If you listen closely, you can hear a faint clanging noise that sounds like metal being worked with. This is actually the sound effect from 2008's Iron Man film, back when Tony was building his Mach 1 Iron Man suit inside of a cave. And at number 6, Stan Lee. We all knew that Stan Lee had filmed multiple cameos in advance prior to his death, so it should be no surprise that he had a little cameo in EndGame. You can catch him at the start of the scene that takes place in the 1970s when Captain America and Tony Stark travel back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. camp Lahai. There's an establishing shot of the camp, and a car drives by it featuring Stan shouting out, I quote, "Make love not war, youngster." His car also has a bumper sticker that reads, "Nuff said," which was one of his common catchphrases in his Stan Soapbox column in Marvel Comics. And at number 5, I can do this all day. One of the many lines that are throwbacks to other MCU movies include this one from Captain America that he says while he's fighting his past self in 2012. This is actually a line that Steve has said twice in the past, the first being in the first Avenger in the 40s when he was getting beaten up in an alleyway pre-Super Soldier Serum, and the second in Captain America Civil War to Tony Stark. This time, his 2012 version says it to Cap, believing that Cap is Loki. Cap retaliates with an exhausted, "I know." Another great moment in this scene is when 2012 Cap has him in a headlock and he gets out of it by saying, "Bucky is alive." Talk about a distraction. And at number 4, cheeseburgers. One of the more bittersweet moments of the film at this number. After Tony's funeral, we see Happy sitting with Tony's daughter, Morgan. He asks Morgan if she's hungry, to which the young girl says, yeah, and that she wants a cheeseburger. Happy smiles, noting that her father liked cheeseburgers as well. This is a reference to 2008's Iron Man at the end of the film when Tony returns to the US and requests that he gets an American cheeseburger. You might remember it from the Burger King product placement. And at number 3, Cap's shattered shield. In the final battle scene prior to all of the dusted heroes showing up, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man take on the Mad Titan. When things start to look bleak and it looks like Thanos might kill Thor, Captain America picks up Mjolnir and interjects. But his solo fight with Thanos ends badly. Thanos knocks him to the ground and literally smashes his shield to bits. This is something that happened in the Infinity Gauntlet comic as well. While the circumstances are quite different, when Thanos and Cap duke it out in the comic, Thanos smashes his shield, crushing it to smithereens. And at number 2, I Am Iron Man. While this might be one of the most obvious references in the film, considering it happened at the penultimate moment of the climax, it's one that had to make it on our list. Oh boy, the impact it had. So back in 2008's Iron Man, the very first MCU film, at the end of the movie, Tony Stark declares to the press, "I am Iron Man." He decides against keeping his identity a secret, and in that one moment, the whole future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe changed. He started it all by introducing the world to superheroes publicly. Tony repeats this line at the end of the battle with Thanos, when he gets the upper hand on the Mad Titan and steals the stones from him, using them to snap and destroy all of Thanos' army and Thanos himself. That moment is especially poignant and important considering it leads to Tony's own death. It's the moment Doctor Strange had seen, hence why he sacrificed the Time Stone for Stark initially. Full circle, all the feels. And finally, and at number 1, Jim Starlin. In our previous part 1 of this list, we mentioned that one of the Russo brothers, Joe Russo, who co-directed the film, appeared in the group therapy scene with Captain America. He wasn't the only person behind the scenes though to have made a cameo in that particular moment. The group also contains Jim Starlin. Jim Starlin is the creator of Thanos and also the mind behind the Infinity Gauntlet comic. His work back in the 90s and late 80s at Marvel is largely responsible for the stories we now watch play out on the big screen. He doesn't have any lines, but it's still a pretty darn neat cameo.